Health outcomes. Changes due to interventions. To bring positive change, patient experiences and health must both improve. Healthcare costs must be lowered, and clinician and staff burnout has to end. But our problems are big. 133 million Americans have at least one chronic disease. 500,000 people are dying every year from hospital errors, injuries, and infection. The shortage of primary care professionals will be as much as 100,000 in just the next 5 years. Big problems require bigger solutions. Positive change needs acceleration. It needs to happen now. But these are not so easy solutions that many don't want to hear, and even few are willing to talk about. How to lead such a change? How to discover, discuss, and disrupt healthcare to make a difference now? This is VITALS, Visionary Health Leadership in Action.
Good afternoon and welcome to VITALS. I'm Dr. John Langell, the president of Northeast Ohio Medical University, and we are pleased to bring you VITALS in partnership with University of Hospitals of Cleveland. VITALS is an open forum to hear from today's national leaders who are transforming the healthcare landscape using the VITALS tools: value, innovation, technology, advocacy, leadership, and service. Today, I'm excited to welcome Laura Adams. Laura serves as the Senior Advisor for the Science and Technology portfolio of the National Academy of Medicine. She provides strategic leadership for the portfolio and leads the Academy's Artificial Intelligence Code of Conduct National Initiative. Her expertise is in artificial intelligence, digital health, and human-centered care. Ms. Adams is a member of the International AI Expert Panel for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development and chairs the Global Opportunities Group for the AI Regulatory Science and Innovation Network in the United Kingdom. Ms. Adams was founding president and CEO of the Rhode Island Quality Institute, Rhode Island's statewide health information exchange, which won the National Council for Community Behavioral Health Excellence Award for impact under her leadership. Please join me in welcoming Laura Adams.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. It's an incredible pleasure to be here with you and to talk about what I think is one of the most exciting and the topics that require some considerable thoughtfulness going forward. I want to let you know that I approach this topic with a lot of humility. When we think about the large language models that came on the scene, ChatGPT and so forth, they came on just 2 years ago. So we are at the forefront. We're at the beginning of something I think incredibly exciting. It's a tool, and it's a tool that if we use it properly, I think holds enormous promise. We also recognize that tools can be improperly used. And so I do want to talk a bit today about the hope, the hype, the promise, and the peril, because there are all of those things associated with AI in healthcare. I'd like to talk about 4 separate areas today. Why today's AI is different. I've had people say to me, we've been doing AI for years. My sense is that not today's AI. And so I want to talk a little bit about what makes it different. I want to talk about the 2 categories of AI, the general categories of predictive and generative AI. I want to talk a bit about the hope, the hype, the promise, the peril, each one of those aspects. And then how we might think about preparing ourselves to practice in healthcare in the age of AI, and then a summary for you and some final thoughts on that. So let's look at why today's AI is different. It is definitely a part of our everyday lives. So if you've flown an airplane recently, maybe over the Thanksgiving holiday, your airplane was on autopilot at some point in time. When you think about the fact that AI flies the airplane, that's pretty impressive. If you used Google Maps, then you've used AI. Maybe you've got a self-driving car. If so, there's AI enabled. Maybe you got a fraud alert from your credit card that said, did you make this charge? If so, that's AI at work. Maybe you've talked to Siri or Google Assistant or Alexa or any of those. If so, you've used AI. And certainly if you've got our Ring camera, then you've definitely used AI. We've seen it now start to become almost a tsunami in healthcare, where suddenly the rise of AI in healthcare has been, it feels like it's been abrupt in some ways. It really hasn't when we think about predictive AI. But of course, when generative AI hit the scene, all bets were off and it was a game changer, no question about it. So we see here that this story is reporting that hospital bosses are betting on big tech. And I think that may be true across the country in a number of things, even outside of healthcare. So what makes generative AI different? The fact that it's evolving at such a speed, and this speed is almost faster than we can comprehend as human beings. We looked at that first generation of Chat GPT when it came out, and it was 3.0 and then 3.0 to 4.0, astonishing gains in that. So I watch this field very closely, and I've got to say that I'm overwhelmed on a daily basis with the new applications that come out, the new tools that are coming out, the improvements to the tools that we've already had in such a short period of time. So the speed with which it evolves is something that makes it dramatically different than any other digital innovation that we've experienced in the past. The ability to scale AI is another thing that makes it quite different. I was watching a hospital. They were putting in a system where they were dependent upon people to sit in the rooms, watchers and sitters, to actually try to make sure that a patient at risk for falling didn't fall. Now, they were experiencing budget issues. They weren't able to hire as many of these sitters. The sitters that had the jobs, it's an incredibly difficult job to just watch another human being during the entire hours-long shift that you're on. So they were talking about the idea of bringing in the AI and watching that AI system be able to read that patient's movements in about 30 minutes of admission and be able to alert and detect the difference between normal movements of this patient and a movement that might suggest that they're about ready to move toward a fall was just amazing. You buy that system one time, and you can scale it across your entire hospital system. Very different than trying to put a human sitter in each room. So when we talk about scale, we talk about, in many ways, the advances that we're seeing are less expensive, and they're actually higher quality than the things that we've been using before. So scale is the second thing. Ubiquity is another thing. When we think about other digital innovations, a particular tool or technique or whatever, it may have been in a certain section of healthcare. So we think even of electronic health records, which were I'd say an innovation that were necessary because we really needed to get our healthcare digitized. And so the idea about ubiquity is that when we think about electronic health records or any other digital innovation, they were confined to a particular aspect of healthcare. So the documentation, the many things that went on in the EHR, but it didn't extend to other areas of the healthcare system or other ways in which we took care of patients or other aspects. It was confined in its own area. Not so with AI. Because AI is going to be available and is available, I think there will be no aspect of healthcare that AI is going to leave untouched. So it is in the supply chain management. We're going to find it. We're seeing it in coding and billing. We're seeing it in patient flow. We're seeing it in patient and customer service kinds of things. We're seeing it in clinical applications. We're seeing it in inpatient, outpatient. We're seeing it in the usual healthcare system. We're seeing it in direct-to-consumer health tools. So it has a ubiquity about it that makes it entirely different. And then the democratization of these tools, meaning that if you have a cell phone, a smartphone, you have access to the most powerful large language models in the world. And so that is, no matter who you are, you can access Chat GPT or Gemini or Llama or Claude or any of those through that aspect of it. So that democratization is really, really important. So today's AI really is quite the unicorn. And so when I asked Chat GPT, I said, you are a unicorn, so please draw me a picture of yourself as this AI unicorn. And that's the picture of itself that it drew. And I've got to say, I find it a tad disturbing. So we'll switch forward. So the machine-based learning system definition from OECD is the one that I like to use for artificial intelligence. People will ask about what's the definition of it. And I like to be sure that we have a base definition. And this is the one that I'm finding is sort of rising to the surface internationally. is the OECD. So I just want to talk about two major and sort of oversimplified categories of predictive and generative. Of course, there's much more detail and nuance behind all of this, but these categories are a bit oversimplified. So the predictive AI, when we think about this, it does look a bit like our predictive analytics that we've used before, except these tools are uniquely different than predictive analytics because they use structured and unstructured data, meaning it doesn't have to be something that was filled in on a field for it to be able to do its work in predictive AI. The predictive AI systems learn from the complex relationships and the patterns in the data, and it does this without human intervention. So these things are emergent. They change, they morph, which means they've got to be managed in a very different way. It starts to begin to portend this idea that we can't just set them and forget them. We can't install and put an application into place and then expect it to operate like a molecule, a drug, for example, or a machine, like a device. These things, again, are emergent. So it requires a new aspect of collaboration and learning and monitoring. And I really love it because what I think this does for us is anytime that we can sharpen our skills at understanding whether what we're doing is actually working and doing that as close to real time as possible, I think that's a plus. It's a plus for us. It's a plus for patients. So I'm excited about that aspect. Predictive AI can do a number of really incredible things like forecast hospital readmit likelihood, give us some advance warning of patient deterioration, diagnose disease much more quickly and accurately. When we talk about the medical error problem that we have in healthcare, a huge aspect of that is incorrect diagnosis, misdiagnosis, or missed diagnosis. And so the idea that we're going to have a companion, a tool, a capability that will assist us with that, very exciting. Speed up insurance claim submissions. It can predict disease severity and the need for hospitalization, lower that risk of sending a patient home when we shouldn't or hospitalizing them when we shouldn't. And then when we think about these large language models, they are so different because these are algorithms that are trained on enormous amounts of data. So the big ones that I mentioned, Gemini, ChatGPT, Llama, all of those, are trained on the entire web. So that's a tremendous amount of data. Now, there are certainly large language models that are trained on smaller, more contained types of data sets. But these that we just talked about are trained on the entire web. They can detect patterns and structures from text, video, audio, images, code, all of those different things. And what makes them uniquely different and really like something we've never seen before is that they create new content. They create something new out of whole cloth for us. So it's extremely exciting. What can generative AI do that we haven't seen before? It can create structured summaries from clinical encounter conversations. This is the one AI application that is spreading across the land like I have never seen before in terms of a new tool. These are the AI scribes. So you might think of DAX or Nuance or a Bridge or those types of applications. They allow a provider and the patient to make eye contact, to have a human connection, for the provider to not be over in the corner as a data entry clerk. It allows them to have that human connection and be able to listen intently to the patient, and the patient feel that sense of that they're being listened to and they're being heard. And then it develops this structured summary from it. It has to be, of course, reviewed and checked by the clinician, no question about it, but super exciting. It can generate accurate and complete billing codes from tons of information in the EHR, personalized treatment plans, sifting through mounds of data in EHR and serving up insights to clinicians. I love this one because in Rhode Island, we built a huge information exchange where we brought all of the care delivery systems data into one central repository, and we were able to allow any clinician with a relationship with the patient to access it in a moment of need. And I was so proud of it. And one of the providers said to me, a physician colleague of mine said, Laura, bless your heart. And that's never a good sign. He said, I think your heart's in the right place. But when I go into that massive amount of information, I've got a patient in front of me, I'm looking for a needle in a haystack. And he said, and all you keep doing is adding more hay to that haystack. And I realized that we were going to need to overlay something on top of it that could extract the insights out of that. AI is that tool that can do that. So some important differences between the two here is that predictive AI is more precise like a computer. So it's narrowly focused on single tasks. Let's find out if this lesion in a chest X-ray is actually cancer or not. It's more trained on specific data, a limited amount of data with a limited scope. It's much easier to control and govern and prevent or allow access to. Generative AI, on the other hand, is about creativity and possibilities. Things that get generated that were not there before. It's something new. We had not seen it before, trained on the entire web. Very challenging to govern because of its ubiquity and its democratization, meaning I've seen hospitals put bans on the use of ChatGPT, for example, only to have providers say, I just go in the other room and use it on my phone. It's very, very hard to restrict or govern. And it is literally in everyone's hand and it's spreading like wildfire. So let's talk about the hope, the hype, the promise, and the peril on this. So the hope is that it will help us solve some of our most vexing problems in healthcare. And we have vexing problems. There isn't any question about it. We see our latest Commonwealth Fund report coming out this year, Mirror, Mirror 24, a portrait of a failing US healthcare system. And you can go into that report, and there are a number of accessible slides and descriptions of that report if you don't have time to read it in its entirety. But here are two aspects that have not changed for us over many years, but they're still equally disturbing every time we see them. This one is about the expenditure here. So we have an expenditure per capita expenditure that just far exceeds the other 9 countries that we were compared to, the developed countries. When we then look at what about performance? So it's one thing to look at the cost of the healthcare system, but if you're getting a much better product, then maybe the cost is justified. So if you look at the axes here, it's on the vertical axis, it's the lower healthcare system performance to the higher. It's lower healthcare spending on the horizontal axis to higher healthcare spending. Where are we? Unfortunately, we're the highest, but our quality doesn't show it. So we don't get the concomitant value out of that expenditure. And so this is, again, one of those most vexing problems. The problem of medical error persists. It's been 25 years since To Err is Human. My organization put out this publication 25 years ago. And I think while we have made progress and we have, without question, put a lot of work into this, we are still nowhere near that our vision would have been for 25 years in the future. This one's personal to me because as a young practitioner early in my career, I worked in a rural 35-bed hospital, tiny little hospital, and people depended upon us literally for their lives in that hospital. We had at most 2 or 3 staff members on each shift. We had 2 doctors at the hospital, both of whom went home at night, and we were alone at night with patients. And that's just, that was the way it was. And in that rural setting, early in my career, I know if you're a clinician, you know that feeling of living sort of in that subliminal fear that you'll leave a shift or you'll leave a time that you spent at work and you will have made a medical error. You'll get a call that says that something happened. And I got my call very early in my career. I was working a night shift with a licensed practical nurse, and we had 35 patients, and I was prepping a 7-year-old child for surgery that morning. And inadvertently, I sent the 7-year-old child into the operating room with a lethal dose of pre-op medication on board, administered in my own hand. Of course, I didn't know it. I was starting to leave my shift that morning, and I heard the intercom from the surgery area come on from the OR. And our surgeon said, is Laura still here? Because somebody's got to get a hold of her. There's something dramatically wrong with this young girl, and we need to know what Laura gave her pre-op because she's seizing, she's going into a coma, and I think she's going to die. I raced over to the medication area. I looked down and I saw that I had given her 10 times overdose of the drug scopolamine. And I knew that in overdose, that was seizures, coma, and death, especially in a pediatric patient. And it was a terrible catastrophe for me. By the grace of God, the powers of the universe, that amazing, amazing care team saved that child's life that morning and spared me from having to have lived out the rest of my life and spared that family the cost of the loss of their precious little girl. And when we finally got back and were able to step back and got some perspective on this, we realized that the system had been designed for that order to have been hand transcribed 6 times before it got to me as the provider that day. 6 times, and 2 times by someone with no pharmacological background that would not know that if you have let that pass through that many hands and you move a decimal point, that it'll be death by decimal point. Those people couldn't have known that. And I started thinking, gee, healthcare systems cannot be designed this unsafely. They just can't be. And I backed up further and further and opened the aperture. And the more I looked, the more concerned I was. And so when To Err is Human came out, I wasn't surprised at all, but I did think it was a moment in time, a watershed moment, that we would for sure have a much safer healthcare system in the wake of the understanding of how many people's lives were being lost by care that was intended to help, just like mine. Well, again, we've not made that progress. We also know that we've got an epidemic that is one of our other vexing problems for which there is no vaccine. This epidemic is from providers feeling like there is a sense of being demoralized in terms of a workforce. And if we think we have a prayer of achieving the promise of AI or the promise of any of the other things we're doing in quality and safety, the aspirations we have or the kind of care we want to deliver, we're never going to be able to deliver it with a demoralized workforce. So I'm excited about the idea of being able to attack this vexing problem with AI as well. So let's talk a little bit about the hype. The hype for AI, if you haven't seen the Gartner hype cycle, I love this hype cycle. It is shows that for most digital innovations, there's a technology trigger, and we get super excited about it. So we start to fly up that to the peak of inflated expectations at the top of that peak. And we get so excited about it, and we think it's going to do everything, solve world hunger, it's going to make peace in the world, it's going to do all of these things. And then we find out what its capabilities really are, and we find ourselves sliding almost face first down into the trough of disillusionment. And we start to realize, oh my gosh, it cannot do this, it cannot do that. And then we come out into the slope of enlightenment and to the plateau of productivity. I think this will be somewhat true for AI. I actually don't think we're going to slide as far down into the trough of disillusionment. But for the moment, we are on that way up to the peak of inflated expectations because the hype is crazy. And we know how to do hype in healthcare. When we think about just taking a look at, and many of you know that this is Elizabeth Holmes from Theranos. She was the former CEO of Theranos. And boy, if you take a look at the hype here, she told her investors and all of the world actually that she was going to take a few drops of blood and be able to do basically every blood test known to man on those few drops of blood. She went on for quite some time. And you can tell here that she was spotlighted a number of times. I mean, the next Steve Jobs, that's kind of hype extraordinaire. We all know where Elizabeth Holmes is now. She's in federal prison in Bryan, Texas, serving out an 11-year sentence for defrauding her investors. So we know that hype can happen in healthcare. And I think it is actually, there's a heap of hype in AI right now. We think it's going to sort of automatically solve all of our problems. Here it comes. And when I listen to the most optimistic, I think, oh, wow, it really, there is that sense it's going to automatically solve the problems. We hear that AI is going to revolutionize and disrupt all industries and all society is going to be completely transformed. And then we'll see people saying, what are you, knucklehead? Didn't you see the Terminator? This thing's going to kill all of us. So there's also the hype in the other direction that said, you know, don't be an idiot. This thing is going to be the demise of civilization. We also hear AI is going to be smarter than humans. And I know that some of you might be thinking, well, okay, but maybe which humans, because, you know, it might not be that big a deal. So at any rate, we're not at the peak yet. There's more hype to come, I think. But the promise of all of this, when I start looking at all of these areas where we're going to be able to see AI have an impact, we're already seeing it in administrative efficiencies. When I talked about that AI scribe, we're already seeing it in doing better things for coding, for being able to surface, for example, claims that are about ready to time out. I was talking to one organization, one healthcare system in the mid-Atlantic that said, the new CEO said, when I got there, we had $18 million in claims that had timed out, that we actually lost because we didn't even submit the claim on time. We put an AI application in place that started to serve those claims up to us so that we would attend to them earlier. He said we dropped that 18 million loss down to a 5 million loss in 1 year. And I'm watching similar stories. I've visited places all over the country. I went this summer to see Appalachian Regional Health in Lexington, Kentucky. I went down to Florida and visited places there. I went to Beacon Health in South Bend, Indiana. I went to Bryan Health in Lincoln, Nebraska. I went out to Cottage Health in Santa Barbara. So that because I spend a lot of time with academic medical centers, big ones, Mayo, Hopkins, Stanford, Duke, all of those. But I really wanted to see what it was like in these smaller organizations. And they are experimenting and moving forward with AI as well. And I see them being equally excited. When I tell you about the time that I was watching them do the AI sitter application to prevent patient falls, that was in one of these smaller hospital systems. Super exhilarating and exciting. So in diagnostics, again, improving our ability to diagnose accurately, completely. Patient engagement, we're watching that already improve. EHR optimization, I'm going to say more about that in a minute. Drug development with protein folding that just won the Nobel Prize for the protein folding capabilities that we see. That can shorten drug development time, identify targets faster. I think that we're seeing a completely revolutionary moment in drug development because of AI. Quality and safety. We just had an AI summit with University of California, San Diego about 3 weeks ago, where we were discussing all sorts of applications that I think will help us break through on quality and safety. And as you know, as I've mentioned, it's personal to me. It really matters to me. I'm going to be spending a lot of time focusing on how we've got a new opportunity to make new gains because of what AI affords us in terms of quality and safety. Training and education, we want to be able to do a better job with that and really be innovative. And I see I don't have an E on my education. So there we go again. Always hate to have a discussion about quality and safety on number 6 and then have a quality issue in number 7, but there we go. And then behavioral health. I want to say something specifically about behavioral health. I'm going to mention that I mentioned a bridge as the ability to do the scribe mechanism. Bayesian health is another example of where that sits on top of an EHR with its enormous amount of information. David Eddy said about 2 decades ago that the complexity of modern medicine has exceeded the capacity of the unaided human mind. And I think that could not have been more true 2 decades ago, and it certainly is true now. And Bayesian helps aid that human mind, aid that clinician by sifting through things, serving things up. It just makes recommendations, doesn't tell a clinician what to do. It's not making decisions. It's just highlighting, and it's looking at those relationships and those patterns that we as human beings often can't even see. We see incredible capabilities of AI that we don't even know how it does it. So for example, when we do retinal fundus scans using AI, that application can tell us a person's sex assigned at birth, and we don't know how it can do it. It can also pick up, and it's the only FDA-approved diagnostic application. It can diagnose diabetic retinopathy, that application. But it can also tell us this adjunct thing, and we don't know how it does it. It just has the capacity to see these relationships. So the mental health aspect, one of my favorites is Thymia, being developed in the UK. And the reason that I love Thymia, because it's a simple video game, people play it. But one of our challenges in mental health is we have not had the ability to, to measure longitudinally whether people are getting better. So we don't know whether our interventions work. It's not like we can check like blood pressure and find out if we're succeeding with statins or dietary changes and we're getting better handle on the blood pressure or blood sugars. It's really hard in mental health. And so when I watch Thymia, watching people do this, they want to make mental health conditions as measurable as physical health in terms of our improvement of those conditions. So as you're playing the video game, this AI is analyzing eye gaze and voice and micro expressions, your reaction times, your memory, your error rates. It's capturing all of these things. And as the interventions, your mental health interventions are happening, you're able to test over time whether your mental health conditions are getting better. Listening to the voice. If I were you and wanting to see where I think we're going to have the most startling advances in AI, I think it's going to be in voice, because AI can hear in a wide variety, a huge spectrum, far beyond what we human ear can pick up. And so it can hear and begin, we're starting to see a capability of it to detect things like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or bipolar or depression. We're starting to see cardiac illness being able to be detected in the voice, and just an amazing array of things. I was watching also a new tool coming out of of Australia that was recently just purchased by Pfizer. ResApp is the name of that application. A person can speak into it, and if they have a cough and they cough into it, it can very accurately tell us whether this is COVID or asthma or bronchitis or pneumonia or a variety of just COPD. It's just amazing what the application of voice AI can do. And again, monitoring these and metrics over time. So I'm so excited. Another benefit of AI for hospital systems is that we sit on a trove of data in our healthcare systems, a trove of patient data that we have left untapped. We haven't been able to understand and bring these things to bear and learn from all of that data. AI changes all of that. So some people are describing that or regarding that as data is the new oil. So we do see, and I think there's a controversial aspect to this, that healthcare institutions have a new revenue stream if they choose to sell that data. Now, there's a question about privacy, a question about all of those things that go along with it. Is this ethical? Should we do it de-identified? But there's also the flip side of this too, is that if you don't sell your patient's data and you happen to have a unique patient population that you see, then there's no way for that data to be included in the training of algorithms, and those algorithms will be less effective on your population of patients. So there's kind of a need to share the data, should that data be sold, but when we're thinking about it as there's an opportunity there. Let's talk about the peril for a moment. There is a loss of privacy of these things. When we upload something into ChatGPT, for example, that's uploading it into the internet. And if you've just uploaded the patient's record, that's an instant HIPAA breach, because that becomes part of the internet and it's recycled through and used and shows up again in other places. So there are potential losses of privacy. If healthcare institutions choose to sell the data, they don't de-identify it, there are issues associated with that. So there are real privacy concerns around this, even with de-identified data. There's bias in all of these. So we were startled in 2023 when Rona Wang, there was a story about her in the Boston Globe up here where I'm based in Boston. And Rona is a student at MIT, and she decided to upload her photo into ChatGPT and to ask it to make it a little bit more professional so that she could post it on LinkedIn. So she asked it to do that. And what it did was it basically lightened her hair, skin, eyes, and made her white. That was the internet's idea of what a professional photo would look like. It wasn't a woman of color. So when we look at this, again, we think of AI as being very, very futuristic. AI is trained on all kinds of data from the past, and that data is full of bias. We know for a fact that most of our research in this country over the past many decades has been done on white men, and white men in a certain age range, not women, for example, not people of color. So we know that we've got huge issues with the existing database and research database that we have. So it does perpetuate biases. You probably had one of these strapped on your finger if you were sick during COVID, or you were trying to make sure you weren't sick during COVID, or if you've done this with your patients over time, you obviously have put one of these on your patients. We discovered shortly after the peak of the pandemic that the algorithms that are built into these systems were trained primarily on light skin. So if you have any degree of melanin in your skin, they were less accurate at getting your pulse ox levels. So it might suggest that it did suggest that the pulse oxygen levels were higher in those people with more melanin. The more melanin, the more inaccurate it was, the higher it gave as your oxygen reading. I have no doubt that there were people during the pandemic that visited emergency rooms or urgent care centers and were told your pulse ox is fine. Maybe you ought to go home and just, rest. And I think maybe their pulse ox wasn't fine. We know for a fact that it wasn't. So we have some concerns that if we don't watch the bias in all of this, then it will widen an equity divide that we already have. We know that these things hallucinate. When we talk about it generates content, if you ask one of these large language models a question and it doesn't know the answer, it'll make it up. I guess it's more human-like than we really imagine. Sometimes if humans don't know the answer, we make it up. Well, they certainly do. We have made, again, great progress in tamping down the number of hallucinations. That's a number one priority of the people that put out the large language models, is making sure that it does not hallucinate. But we have to know that they do. They do right now. So it is user beware of anything that is returned, anything that's generated, the content that comes back to you. We always have to be aware that there could be a hallucination associated with this. And also, if data really is the new oil, then I think that Michael Millinson was right when he said if data is the new oil, then privacy and patient rights are climate change. We've got to be really careful about the temptation to make money off of the data. Even if it is accompanied by that, we've got to get these data into the development of algorithms so they won't be representative of the patients and they won't be able to help the patients. I think we have to be extremely careful about it because it's quite tempting. We have faced a lot of these topics head on, and we did a project at the National Academy of Medicine called the Healthcare AI Code of Conduct. We're about to publish our final paper in 2025 on this, but we had people approach us about 18 months ago and say, now, the good news is AI is coming to healthcare and everybody is preparing for it by putting out a set of guidelines, principles, frameworks to govern AI. And the bad news is everybody's putting out their own principle, guidelines, frameworks to govern AI. So we've got all of these that are coming out. And can we take a look at the plethora of these that have come out and help us harmonize and understand? Let's take a look and see where do these things agree with each other? Where are our areas of agreement? Where do we have sort of inconsistencies between these? And where do we have out and out gaps? So we did that project. We did a very thoughtful landscape review where we looked at 60 of the guidelines, principles, and framework sets that were out there. We looked at guidelines from professional medical societies. We looked at information from the federal agencies, any guidance that had been produced by the federal agencies. We also took a look at it globally, the OECD, the UN, the WHO, and the EU. We wanted to see what those principal guidelines and framework sets said. And then we pulled all of them together and we found out that we had some areas of agreement, like transparency, fairness, those areas of agreement. Some areas that were somewhat inconsistent, safety, for example, was one of the areas that was somewhat inconsistent. And then interestingly enough, we saw a couple of places where there were out and out gaps. And one of those was that almost none of those guidelines, principles, and framework sets that we saw spoke to the goal being the focus on human health and advancing human health as the primary aim. We also saw there was almost a dearth of reference to the need to monitor these algorithms once they've been put into place. So we were shocked to see that. The third thing that we saw was that there was not an regard for the environmental impact. I'm so pleased to see now just another announcement yesterday of someone else looking at a different whether it's solar or a different power source, because the environmental impact is mind-boggling, honestly. So we did that. So we looked at the Artificial Intelligence Code of Conduct and we published a paper, which I will show you a QR code for in a minute. We were able to publish that paper in March that explained all the background, talks about the landscape review that we did. We developed a principle set. But the other thing that we applied was the notion of complex adaptive systems, where all of my years in quality improvement, whether I was improving central line infections, ventilator-associated pneumonia infections, whatever it was that I was improving, I was struck by the fact that we could get to almost 95% or 98% quality when we did just 4 or 5 interventions, but we did them consistently for every patient for which they were appropriate. And every patient got the 5 interventions or so. But I was always struck by the fact that it wasn't 12, it wasn't 20. It was a very small subset. And so I began to look at the complex adaptive systems idea of simple rules. And we started to apply that to our work in the code of conduct. And we wanted to generate a set of simple rules that people could use in the moment of decision making, could use every day, could put at their desk or on their computer monitor somewhere, where it caused them to think about as they're moving through any stage of the AI life cycle. Are we applying these sets of principles for ethical and responsible use of AI? So these code of conduct commitments are protecting and advancing human health and connection as the primary aim, ensuring equitable distribution of risks and benefits to make sure that we aren't benefiting one group of people or putting all the risks on another group of people, engaging people as partners with agency. And what we mean by agency is that they have the ability to affect decisions and they have the ability to affect outcomes. And by people as partners, we want to learn from what in some ways was a bit of a debacle with the application of electronic health records. Now, I know we had to get digitized, and I was a big proponent. I helped spread electronic health records all across the US. And there are some days when I feel like I should be doing penance for that, honestly, but we did have to get digitized. But what we didn't do was do an adequate job of including the end users from the get-go, in the very beginning, the design, including patients in that, and having their perspectives inform us, teach us, imbue us with what it was, which would be that North Star of purpose. So that's what we mean when we're talking about engaging people as partners. This means developers, ethicists, equity experts, these people at every stage of the AI life cycle. We also think that a commitment ought to be that we use AI to renew the moral well-being and sense of shared purpose of the healthcare workforce. Monitor and openly share methods and evidence of AI's performance on health and safety, and also to innovate, adopt, collaboratively learn, and continuously improve. We are all in this together, and we are all at the starting gate. So I just want to close with a couple of sections here to prepare yourself to practice. One of the first things that I would say about that is just know that your patients are moving ahead rapidly. They are already using this. They will, if they haven't already, come to you and said, I asked ChatGPT, and this is what it said. I'm on the same stage about 3 or 4 months ago with a mother who had a child that was having excruciating back pain, was having tingless, numbing, almost inability to walk. This child was about 7 years old and had had this for about 3 years, had been through 17 different providers. The mother was up there with this child, and the child was up on the stage, running around, disrupting things, and we were totally delighted that he was, because he could barely walk shortly before that. And what she did was she explained that she put his whole medical record into ChatGPT out of exasperation, and that medical record said, here's some things that ChatGPT returned and said, you might want to consider these things. At the top of that was tethered cord. That child's spinal cord was tethered at birth, abnormally tethered. And as the child grew, it stretched the cord. No one could figure that out until she got this information from Chat. I'm not saying that this is a be-all, end-all. She went straight to a pediatrician. They went straight to surgery, and that child, again, was doing these things. I'm watching a patient speaking about this at almost every conference that I am asked to speak at now that includes a patient voice in it. They're using it, and they're moving ahead rapidly. The people to watch on this, the hashtag patients use AI, Hugo Campos, Andrea Downing from the Light Collective, and Dave DeBronkart from ePatient Dave, Democratizing Healthcare. These are the pioneers in this. If I were you, I would follow each one of those on LinkedIn. I would definitely follow at least ePatient Dave, because he incorporates the voices of all of them. But these are the pioneers. These are the ones to watch. So to prepare yourself to practice in this era of AI, do learn the AI fundamentals like we're working on today. One of the best books to do that is Peter Lee from Microsoft, along with Zach Kohane from Harvard. And the beauty of this book is that it was edited by Carrie Goldberg. She's an author on the book. She knows how to turn these things into almost a conversational, it's almost like reading a novel, and it's imparting all of this wisdom and information about the AI fundamentals. So I recommend this book very highly. There are many, many more. There's a podcast. You can't turn 3 degrees in any way, any direction in healthcare and not see that there's a seminar, a conference, a webinar, something on AI. Be curious, get involved, engage, test, try. The faster that you can start experiencing this, the better for you. Familiarize yourself with responsible AI governance practices like the Code of Conduct. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of these slides. We want to be sure that you have the ability to get to that AI Code of Conduct paper, and you can see that governance framework. Here's another one, a white paper that just came out from Duke about responsible AI governance practices. Participate in and advocate for inclusive collaboration. That means patients to all phases of the AI lifecycle, and really seize this chance to help shape the future. So the summary that I'd make here is that AI is changing the future of healthcare very rapidly. It holds enormous promise for us and for our patients if we solve some of our most vexing problems and if we avoid the peril. Now's the time to join in, help shape the future of this. We collectively have this opportunity. The kaleidoscope pieces are in motion, and we can affect the pattern that they fall into. Lean in and learn is the most, I think, effective advice I could give. It's still very, very early, and no matter whether or not you feel overwhelmed, you are not behind the curve. Believe me, I feel overwhelmed every day, but you are not behind the curve. So I want us to not forget that the AI is not sentient or conscious, at least not yet, but it's not sentient or conscious. Truly personalized care that we want to deliver and we aspire to deliver to our patients is all about patients being seen and heard and having that sense of belonging. It can't replicate human connection. And I think about that every time I hear a patient's story, because what I've learned over the years, if I listen intently to a patient's story, that AI can give us information, but stories give us wisdom. And it's the wisdom that is the ability for us to deliver the kind of care that, again, we aspire to. So I think there's always going to be humanity and healing. And I think of it like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where things that are shattered and you think should just be put in the dustbin because they're ruined, they actually bring them back together and fuse them together using gold filigree. They do it with pride. They call them precious scars. And I'm thinking that if we heal through human connection, we too can create precious scars if we think about the fact that AI, in my hope and dream, is that gold filigree that we can use to fuse the brokenness back together of a patient whose life has been shattered by some sort of an illness, an infirmary, a condition. And I think too, from just our health systems, and in many ways our society, we're a bit shattered. And so I'd love to see us turn all the power of AI toward fusing us back together to create something more beautiful than if it had never been shattered in the first place. So I want to stop there and thank you for your attention today. My apologies for the rough start to all of that, but if I can be of any assistance to you, my email is on the screen there, and happy to take some questions.
Laura, good afternoon. Wow, what an amazing talk, and just incredible insights and recommendations and really wisdom for the way ahead in this brave new world in which we find ourselves. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Forrest Face, and I'm the provost here at the Northeast Ohio Medical University. And I'll tell you, what a privilege to have spent the last 50 minutes listening to Laura and her insights and her wisdom and all the things that she tells us to think about in caring for our patients in this new era with this new tool with such great opportunity, but also things that we need to think about to use it right. Laura, I do have a couple questions if you don't mind. What do you see as some of the most exciting healthcare AI applications that you're seeing now in development that'll have the best impact and most impact for the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are so many, but the ones that have really captured my intellectual curiosity lately, and actually kind of captured my heart, is one of them being developed in the UK right now. Again, is one that will soon be available here, but it can predict an MI within the next 10 years. And the interesting thing it doesn't just say yes or no that you are likely to have an MI in the next 10 years. It will tell you when, with a particular range of time. It will tell you when. And how they did that was they took medical records, thousands and more than that, probably maybe a million more, several million medical records in the UK. And they trained the model to look for. Of course, these were times when they knew the patients had MI. So we knew when the patient had the MI. So we could look at the prediction from the AI and see if the AI in those populations that already had their MI could accurately predict it. It does. And so the ability to tell something that far in advance. I'm watching another colleague, I think this one may be coming out of Israel, but there are plenty of those that are happening in the United States. They're developing a small patch that could be placed on the side of a child's head that will be able to predict an epileptic seizure an hour in advance. If a parent were able to predict in advance when something like this was about to happen, the ability to intervene, we're watching the same developments in asthma. The parent could know that an asthma attack was imminent and give them any amount of time ahead of time rather than just having it happen right now. And I'm watching this getting ahead of the things that are happening. It's very exciting to me to see that ability for us to do these things, not necessarily also sitting in the healthcare setting. I'm watching direct to consumer applications. And while I think that we have to stop and think about maybe the impact on revenue for the healthcare system, for example, watching things like my brother would not talk about his hearing situation until Apple came out with their AirPods, and he could test his hearing by talking into the phone. It gave him a hearing test, and then it adjusts his AirPods to match the hearing needs that he has. And for $250, hearing aids about, $2,000, $4,000, $6,000 if you have the high end. And so we're watching some of the cost of some of these things, especially when they're direct to consumer, start to come down. And I'm beginning to see an empowerment mechanism coming through into the patient's hands. And the most exciting thing that I'm watching is when a provider sees this, there's almost a triad now. It used to be the clinical dyad, the patient and the physician or the provider. And now I think it's a triad if we think about it. I don't think AI should be prominent in that triad, but I think we've got a new assistant that we've never had before.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, you sit there and think about the number of lives that can be saved, and folks that as we enter this holiday season will go home to their families that in the past we would have lost because of this new tool that can just help us in so many ways. It really is exciting. It really is exciting. You mentioned the risk of bias in your talk. And I think that's something that we saw in COVID, where we realized that not everyone trusts medicine, and so they're not reflected in the databases. How can we ensure that AI systems, as they're developed and implemented, really don't produce biased outputs?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that question. One is how do we earn the trust? And I think people have referred to it in the past as get populations to trust us. I think we ought to switch the language to how do we earn the trust of populations? We've got Tuskegee, we've got Henrietta Sacks, we've got these things, Lax, in our history that, so not surprisingly, there's a lack of trust in how we use the data in the past. And I think that we're learning a lot from things like All of Us. And when I listen to people that talk about how they have changed their approaches and how they understand that we go in as guests into these communities and that we need to interact as guests in these communities. We need to understand who in those communities has the trust of those communities. And you don't try to circumvent them. You understand that you partner with them and work with them to understand what this community wants and needs in order for them to grant you the gift of their data. So I think that there's that aspect. How these things are I worry when I hear people say we need a human in the loop with AI. And hear me out on this. I don't think what I'm saying here is let the AI run rampant. There's no problem with it, never hallucinates, never makes a mistake. I'm not saying that at all. but I do come out of patient safety, and I come painfully out of patient safety conditions where we relied on vigilance of human beings for many years to try to catch whether the decimal point was in the wrong place or whether this was a med error or not. Vigilance did not serve us well when we were trying to reduce medical error. So I want to see, yes, a human in the loop, but I don't want to see us expecting that already overburdened clinicians are now going to be tasked with the idea of, you have to watch this algorithm like a hawk so it doesn't drift or have, come out with inappropriate outcomes. So what I'm excited about now is we're starting to train AI applications that will be the watchers of the other applications, and they're going to be specifically watching for drift. I'm really excited about that. ARPA-H, the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA-H, does big moonshot projects. They've just funded a project called Precise AI or Precision AI. And that particular project is this idea of how do we train AI to be the watcher of other AI so it never gets fatigued, it never has to take a break, it never has to go on vacation or be with family or need to sleep or do any of those things. It can watch the AI 24/7. And this is where I'm excited to see, because we just can't put another burden on providers when it's an act of vigilance that we actually, from learning from human factors research, we're not very good at with vigilance.
Yeah. There's a blessing that says, may you live in interesting times. And I can't think of a more interesting time to be alive than to see these new technologies and just the promise that they bring to caring for others and making a difference in people's lives. Thank you so very much for your time today, your insights, your wisdom, and most importantly, for all that you are doing in this field to make a difference for those folks that depend on us so much for their care and for their well-being and their loved ones. So thank you very much. For our readers, please join us next time for the next Vitals on January 9th, 2025, when we'll be joined by the Neomed College of Medicine alumni, Dr. Teresa Michel. She's the Director of Non-Prescription Drugs at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Thank you very much, and happy holidays.
This is Vitals, Visionary Health Leadership in Action.